All right, welcome everyone back to the Power of Passive Investing meetup. Today is December 6th, 2023. For those of you joining us live, welcome. For those of you who are watching this after the fact, glad to have you and look forward to hosting another session today. We have a guest with us, Jeff, who was speaking to us about a topic near and dear to his heart, and he has plenty of content on that. Just to kind of remind you guys of our format of the session here. This meetup is focused on providing educational content to folks who are interested in passive style investing, whether that be real estate or other investment vehicles. We host experts and interesting folks from all different spheres of the kind of investing world. And today, Jeff is here to share his story, his angle with us. So, just as a reminder, this is an educational format. Nothing is meant to be investment advice. Our lawyers tell us to say that. And with not much further ado, Jeff, I'll hand the reins over to you. Maybe just start with a brief introduction for those here, and then you can get right into the content. We'll spend about 30 minutes or so with Jeff just presenting and walking us through, and we'll leave the back end, which should be about 20 minutes or so, for questions. For those of you that are on the call live with us, feel free to utilize the chat function to drop any questions in there, either during the presentation. I'll monitor the chat and relay those to Jeff, or the Q&A session afterwards. So it's great, Jeff. Glad to have you. Glad to see the Eagles are soaring high this season, and I know you're in Philadelphia, so that's good news for you guys. I'm a Giants fan, so maybe we'll get a high draft pick out of this season.
Well, my daughter-in-law is a Giants fan, and she's coming for Christmas. So Christmas Day will be.
That's right.
I have to have muted excitement. I told her I wouldn't yell too loud. But well, thanks, Matt. Just he mentioned about Philadelphia. I live 30 miles north of Philly with my wife of 30 years, and we have 5 kids, three bio babies, and 2 that we adopted. And so we have 3 of them married off. It's great to have them off the payroll, and 2 that are seniors in high school, and so they're still going to cost me a bit of money. But I say all that to say that when I was starting my career, I didn't have all those little guys around the table, and my wife and I wanted to live a lifestyle where she could stay home. And I always called her a stay near home mom because I never found her at the house. They were always out having fun and doing stuff. But our lifestyle was, I was going to go run the career and make as much money as we could to survive at first, and then thrive, and that was just what worked for us. And so that was an interesting way to look at it, because we the Philadelphia area is not an inexpensive area to live in. And what I started in my career was as a research scientist for a pharma company. At the time I joined them, they were the world's most admired company on the front of Fortune magazine for like 6-7 years running. So it was really cool to be part of that organization. And I worked for them for 15 years. And the W-2 job gave me some rear end to be able to do some borrowing, and I started realizing that the stock market wasn't going to quite get me where I was watching all of my friends go. So we started investing in real estate. We actually started investing in real estate before there was podcasts and Zoom calls and YouTube videos, and we actually did short-term rentals before that was even a thing. It was before Airbnb. We were early adopters of Vrbo. And it was just cool because the thing in our pocket, the telephone, all of a sudden at that time became a computer. And so I would actually be able to, on lunch break or whatever, book my tenants, so to speak, and they were coming from Missouri and Europe, and it was just crazy. And so a lot of the things I'm sharing with you tonight are going to be kind of the process that we went through. But at 15 years into my career, I talked to a number of financial planners who basically, it was very clear they only wanted to sling mutual funds my way. And I decided to become a financial planner myself. And so by trade, I'm a financial planner, I'm a CFP. I've got a bunch of other designations that you might not care about tonight. But the point is that my whole business was built around talking to real estate investors, which most real estate investors are their own financial planners. So it was like kind of a weird proposition, but we had ideas that we were bringing to the table that were pretty fresh and new to them. And so we've been able to build a really nice clientele over the years. So I'll go ahead and share screen. What I'm going to do, let's see, I'm disabled from screen sharing. So maybe if you can get me in there, that would be cool. What I'm going to share with you tonight is some of the things very well could make you say, well, I don't know if I believe that, but I just ask that anything that I bring up tonight, you just sure allow it to challenge yourself, but also don't hold the position of being right or wrong. That's not what we're setting out to do tonight. It's more about, can I prove out some of the points that we're trying to share with you. So if it's all right with you guys, and that's a Philadelphia colloquialism that means everybody here, not just males. So anyway, if you hear me say that, that's not cutting anyone out of here. So let me just see if I can screen share. Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to show you on the front part of this, and we're going to go pretty quick. Any questions that come up are fine. We're going to hit that at the 30-minute mark, but we're going to ping along here pretty quick. First thing we're going to do is we're going to do a presentation that I do with real estate investors often. And then Alina had asked me to share a couple other things. And I don't know that because of the speed of the presentation, whether I'm going to be able to prove them out, but that's where the question and answer session will be able to come in pretty helpful. So we titled this "The Problem with the Common Way That People Acquire Real Estate." And basically, the main topics at hand here are not understanding the impact of a cash down payment, falling in love with a cash on cash return. I know that's a favorite discussion point for a lot of people, and then exploring opportunities with asset-backed lending. Some of the stuff here that we're going to talk about might only just wet your whistle. I mean, it might only just open your mind to other possibilities, because we don't possibly have the time tonight to be able to dig into everything that we're going to kind of try to take a look at here. But in true scientist form, I was a biology major, and you always did like problem, hypothesis, data, and then your conclusion. Well, does the way that we finance real estate affect our returns? I think most people know that it does, but the hypothesis here is that you can create better returns, rates of return on a property by using more leverage. I was talking to someone the other day, and they were telling me, like, they were taking like the opposite end of the spectrum, where they wanted no leverage because they told me some war story about some guy that they knew that did real estate and lost it all in 2008. I'm like, well, there's a difference between leverage and then what happened in 2008. And what's happening right now in our economy is not what happened in 2008. Because what happened in 2008 was an aftershock of banks lending way more than they should have. If you could fog a mirror, you could get a loan. Washington Mutual was doing 120% loan to value loans. I mean, how cool is that? It's cool until it's not cool. And that's why people lost some stuff over that 2008 to really 2011 timeframe. Some of the ripple effect of that took several years. And also the banks started tightening up before 2008. Anyone who was in real estate saw that stuff coming. Whether or not we reacted to it, that was a whole nother story. But the data here is that basically what we're going to look at is an all cash deal, a moderately leveraged deal, so 25% down, and then 100% finance deal. And I know some of you might be like, well, Jeff, 100% finance deal, like that's kind of hard to come up with. Well, it is, until you know how to do it. And then it's not. Like, literally every time after that, you should be able to do 100% finance deals if that's what you want to do. I will tell you that for me and my client base, we love that. I mean, we think that 100% finance deals is essentially the holy grail. I just bought a property down in Tennessee, October 19th. It was a 100% finance deal. Now, that 100% finance deal entailed some borrowing, some sub-2 language, and a seller finance wrap. Okay, so there was all kinds of funky stuff going on in that deal, but still one of my most favorite deals because we got 100% financed, and a lot of the terms of the financing were exceptionally good considering the time we're in right now. So some points of consideration and understanding. And look, if you get nothing else out of what we're talking about today, you just if you don't understand this at first pass, just keep being with it. You finance everything that you buy. And when you are buying something, if we're working off of cash position, what we're telling ourselves is, well, we don't want to pay interest, so we're going to come in with cash, and that portion we won't have to pay interest on. But then also we take that money off the table, so we forfeit that opportunity for that money to ever grow in the future. So you either pay interest or you give up the ability to earn interest. That's kind of how this world works. There's no way around it. It's not my random opinion. Again, if you don't understand that at face value, just kind of keep thinking it through and you'll understand that it is absolutely accurate. I'm going to go through this kind of quick, but we can obviously come back to it if there's questions on it. Basically what this is looking at, and I'm going to get a pointer here so that you can kind of follow the bouncing ball, is we're going to look at, so just go left to right with me here. We're going to go with percent of financing is either 0% finance, that's all cash, 75% finance, meaning 25% down, or 100% finance, meaning no money down. The purchase price is going to be $1 million, and the down payment, obviously, for all cash would be $1 million. If it's 25%, it'd be $250. And then I know this should be zero, but I use $1. And the reason is because when I used to do this presentation and I do zero, I would show that there's an infinite return, and people have a real hard time getting their heads around infinite return. So we use $1 so we could show the difference on returns based on the least amount of money down. We're going to sell the property 2 years in for $1.2 million. So the profit in all three circumstances would be $200,000. I don't get more profit because I came with a higher down payment. I get the market appreciation to the same amount in all three circumstances. That we're going to come back to that in a minute, just so you know. But the rate of return on this first would be 10% rate of return. On the second, it would be a 40% rate of return. And then I know people think, well, that's baloney. But because we only put $1 down, it would be 100,000% return. Which, by the way, whenever I show people this, they're like, "That's just a crazy, stupid return." I'm like, "Well, no, but that's just how math works. I'm not trying to trick anybody." And so, what we only want to know here is the least amount of money we put into the deal, the higher our rate of return is. Okay, so that's all we were trying to prove out. I think a lot of you know this already, but it's good to kind of set some level set on how we look at this stuff. Let's see here. Something happened. Okay. So in conclusion, the amount of the down payment does affect the return, like we just said that. And so these findings lead to a couple follow-up questions, which is, well, is there a maximum number of properties able to be financed through using some of these concepts? If there is capital not required for property acquisition, where should it hang out? Like if you don't need to put the $1 million into the property, you only need to put the $250 in, and you had the other 750, like where should it camp out in the meantime before it goes other places? I'm just saying, like, inquiring minds would want to know this. And then can we create scenarios that give more predictable future lending capabilities? So these are all questions that would kind of come and stem from that kind of conversation. So this is kind of like I went through that quicker than I normally do on a presentation to real estate investors. But the reason we do that was we don't want to like have people overly spend time hearing us wax philosophical. We just kind of want to get the motors running on how we should finance some of this stuff. And so when we talk about not putting as much money into the deal, see, the money that goes into the deal is not growing for us. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So if I have $250,000, and I just use that number because I think most people that do a lot of real estate, like, you can picture $250,000 different than someone who just is a W-2 employee. But 5 years in, $250,000 that we can actually spring to life and not have trapped inside of the real estate. At 2%, that grows to 276. At 3%, it's 289. At 4%, it's 304. And so the more years that we have to be able to experience that, like if we get out 20 years, that 250 becomes 371. At 4%, it becomes 547. The reason I show you these tables is sometimes when I talk about an extra 3% or an extra 4% tailwind in behind your real estate projects, I can see people like yawning, like, oh, Jeff, I get double-digit returns in my real estate all over the place. I'm like, right, good, keep doing that. But then let's get another 3-4% pushing in behind it, because if you have that pushing in behind what you're already doing well, that's more, and we like more. Okay, and so when we're talking about 40 years, which some people can see that, some people can't see that time horizon, others of you can, that 250 becomes 1.2 mil at 4%. So my dad used to make a joke about every time he'd see like a penny on the ground, some people would act like they're too big to pick up a penny. And my dad would always say, we don't walk past money. And if you pick up enough of these, you can buy a Corvette. Well, I never really wanted a Corvette, but I get it. Like the more money that we can keep on our side of the ball or be able to have work for us, the better. And to me, when I actually started putting these tables together, I was like, well, if we only work off a cash position, then 250 40 years from now, guess what it's going to still be? 250. But if we can get some of that money working for us differently, then we can end up with some push behind our real estate that's rather significant. And I'm sure most of you can understand that I was understating this by a lot, because when I said 250, that was at year 5, growing out to year 40. Well, shoot, if we're really getting after it in real estate, or even if we're, some of us have real estate and have businesses, the longer you do this, the more you realize that it's not going to be this 250. It might be several $1,000,000 here and several $1,000,000 here that we're not trapping in equity at 4%. Starts to turn into real money. So it's just something to always be considered. Is the money inside of the property? Like again, the $1,000,000 example that I used a second ago, if I didn't need to put the full million in the property, if I could keep more of it out on my side of the ball, I should be able to grow more wealth. So I told Alina also we'd kind of touch on a couple other concepts, which are kind of my, I don't know if you want to call them pet peeves or whatever, but like they kind of bug me. So the one is this concept of cash on cash return. And I ask people this all the time, but did you know that the down payment, which is like the infused equity, like the money you're putting into the property, has a 0% return? And sometimes people nod and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. And then some people say, no, I don't know about that. So if you're watching this live, just put in the chat like, yep, or question mark, like I don't care, like just put something in there to kind of let me know kind of how you view it. But I'd like to prove that to you for a second if I could, because this is not my version of life. This is actually how equity in a property works. And again, we're going kind of quick, so we can kind of discuss this a little bit more in a minute. But as an example, if you pay $100,000 into a property to acquire a property, okay, so we're going to put $100,000 in. You sell the property 2 years later. My question is, of that 100,000 that you put in, don't tell me about what you appreciated. I don't care about that. I just showed you a couple slides ago that we all get the appreciation, right? Like it doesn't matter how much down payment we make, we all get the appreciation. But do you get back more than the 100,000? Yes, perhaps, and that would be the appreciation we just talked about. But you get the appreciation regardless of the down payment. Like, yes, that's correct. Yes, we just looked at that. Of the actual $100,000, though, you get that back dollar for dollar. They don't say, well, hey, Matt, since you put 100,000 in and you held it for 2 years, why don't we give you 110 back? No, that's not what happens. They give you the 100 back dollar for dollar, and then you get whatever market appreciation, which we all get, no matter how much our down payment is. So what I just showed you by corollary was the down payment is not growing for you. Now, we get tricked out on that sometimes because of this cash on cash return concept. And so my bold statement is a cash on cash return is something that someone came up with a long time ago to help investors sleep at night, because their cash is sitting at a 0% return. Your capital inside the property is sitting at a 0% return. But how do we sleep at night? Well, we do this cash on cash calculation. I have people all the time who are very cash heavy and don't want to really deal with mortgages and such like this, argue this point with me. And I'm like, look, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just trying to show you the math and then have you explain to me how you think you're coming on top with a cash on cash calculation, because a cash on cash number makes us feel good. It gives us a target, oh, I want to do 10%, or I want to do 12%, or I want to do 15%. Like, it gives you a target to hunt for, but it does not change the fact that the equity is sitting at 0%. Like, we can do the cash on cash return all we want. It doesn't change the reality that that money is not growing. It's sitting there literally dead as a doornail. And if I had more of that equity not in the property, it actually would allow me to go acquire more properties. So if you really look at how cash on cash works, if I had a choice, I'd rather have two properties that have a 10% cash on cash return, because I get the appreciation in two properties, than to have one property that I can brag that I have a 15% return on. Like, it's just, to me, the math just doesn't hold up for why you would want to bury cash inside of the house or houses or apartments or whatever you're doing based on that explanation. Of course, some of the stuff that I'm saying, you could do a counterpoint and say, well, I'm going to come with 100% cash deal. Like, I'm going to come all cash, but then I'm going to burr it out, or I get that. Okay. I'm not talking about that. Obviously, if you can find a way to spring the max amount of cash back out, that's fine. But how we acquire these properties in the first place really does affect your overall wealth down the road. So I'm now transitioning into the third point, so then we can get to questions here, is that this concept of asset-backed lending. Now, I can tell you, I spend a lot of time each week talking to people that I do not know, who found me on the internet and said, hey, I know you do a lot of stuff with asset-backed lending, and I need to know more about that. Okay, so the asset-backed lending piece goes like this, just to make sure we're talking about the same thing. If you're in business, it's very common that you can borrow against property, you can borrow against equipment, you can borrow against inventory, receivables, et cetera, et cetera. Like, there's lots of different ways in business where if you had like a manufacturing facility, that you could different ways to have the asset that you're showing to the bank, have them give you a loan for that money. For whatever reason, real estate investors, and I can say this very boldly because I've been doing this for 15 years, and I still haven't found the person who has proved me wrong on this. By and large, they're not really that good at finding asset-backed lending, because if they were, then every single one of their deals would look like 100% financing, because you're gonna go get bank money in a lot of circumstances, but then you can come with the asset-backed lending to do the down payment. So most of us, or a lot of us, are very familiar with home equity lines of credit. So I'm just saying that real estate investors don't do it to their full capacity, but real estate investors can use properties. That's the home equity line of credit I just spoke of. They can also use stocks, bonds, government securities, insurance contracts, and even crypto. Okay. So, by the way, until crypto just started waking back up again a little bit, that was a sleepy little conversation. I personally don't do a whole lot or anything with crypto in terms of asset-backed lending. I'm just saying that is an avenue that real estate investors have if they have that as an asset. The idea behind asset-backed lending is you don't sack the asset to go use that capital. Okay, so like if you had $300,000 of stock portfolio, instead of liquidating the stocks, you take a securities-backed line of credit, not a margin loan, but a securities-backed line of credit. It's like a home equity line of credit for your house, except for instead of borrowing against your house, you're borrowing against your stocks. and then you go buy the property with that, but now you have $1 working two places at once. It's still growing in the stock market, ideally. Maybe it's not growing, but it's still in there doing whatever it's going to do. And then you go acquire the piece of real estate. So you have $1 working essentially two places at once. The first time I saw how to do that, the guy who was talking to me about it, he didn't actually even understand real estate. He just was telling me that I could borrow against my stock account. And I was like, that's pretty cool, because if I can keep my money working there and I can parlay that over into real estate, like that works for me. So again, most of us are very familiar with HELOCs. That's how I mean, my very first HELOC was $127,000 line of credit. And that's how I got all my real estate started. So I've legitimately always done 100% financing on all my deals, because I did that first, and then I started using some of these other techniques to be able to continue with that concept of staying in the 100% finance deal. The problem with HELOCs, if there is one, is that you have, like, I had 127. It was never going to be more than that unless my house appreciated. And then I went back to the banks and asked for more, and went back to the banks and asked for more. So at some point, real estate investors tend to cap out on their HELOC pretty quick. And then maybe you can get some HELOCs now on some investment properties. That's great. And then maybe we can do a little bit of that off of that. But at some point, if we're really staying focused on the 100% financing, as there's a house flip or a house sold or whatever, maybe just cash flows from your real estate portfolio, as we stack the cash up, instead of having it hang out at the bank, I'm a big proponent of purchasing assets and then using those assets to be able to help us acquire more real estate. So that's kind of the story behind the asset-backed lending. This is just a slide that I always have at the end, but I will put up this QR code for a second. I'll put it up again later. This QR code is just my contact information. So if anyone here seeing this wants to have further, deeper conversations about your personal situation, just go ahead. I actually prefer someone hit me with a text message than really any of the other ways that are listed there. But that actually shows, I think, my Instagram account, my Facebook, everything like that. So I'm a pretty open book on who I am, and so I give that QR code just so people can do their little research on me if they choose to before they look me up. But anyway, Matt, why don't I kick it back to you, see what kind of questions, thoughts, things that we should expound upon a little bit further. But that's kind of the things I want to share with you guys tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. That's it's a great challenge to just like for many of us, right? Starting in traditional financing and traditional thoughts and approaches. It's a great way to challenge our thinking and get more creative, right? Yep. So I appreciate that. And the counter, I'll just hit you with the counter. I'm sure you hear it every time. I mean, this largely is a conversation about leverage, right? And with leverage comes potentially more risk. When the market's going up, all this works beautifully, right? And it continues. I guess how do you protect against the downside? Imagining one way is to stay out of recourse as much as possible, right? Personal recourse. So if you get, and it's the way you finance too, I'm sure. There's, again, when you talk about HELOCs, for example, or I have business loans, right? And some of them for the equipment come with a personal recourse as well. So all that, again, is just different terms behind the loans and the leverage, which, if you're levering up, certainly want to be aware of. So just curious to hear how you think about the risk side of the equation of the leverage conversation that we're having. And financing it is great, but then a tenant stops paying, then you have to come up with some cash yourself. Hopefully you have the cash flow. If you don't, maybe you can get it from another asset. And if you don't, how do you stop a spiral if a spiral starts occurring, I guess, or protect against, or structurally protect against it?
No, that's perfect. And I think I had a mentor in the business. He used to always say, he'd refer to it as positive, safe leverage. And I was just like, well, I think there's too many words in there, but like there's there's leverage like was happening in 2006-7 timeframe where you you owed more on the property potentially than what it was worth. I'm sorry. Yeah, you owed more than what it was
Yeah.
worth. And that was, you could say, well, that like that's a problem, but like that's only a problem if you're going to sell the property.
Right.
So what I always tell people is if you think that leverage is too risky, so you put your cash into the
Even
property
more, it's your money.
so
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
don't have
Exactly.
to have as much money owed to the bank. Like I'm just like, look, you when I talk to clients, I'm like, look, you have to be at your comfort level. But there's no client that works with me that just because with I mean, I'm just saying because they don't keep burying their money into the properties, there's no client that I work with that has less cash. Or when I say cash, like understand there's air quotes around that because it's not sitting at the bank, but like
Mhm.
liquid money, we'll say they all have more liquid money 5 years in than they had when they started with me, no exceptions. And the only people that would get over their skis a little bit, I would actually see that coming a mile away because they would have no access to capital. And so I tell people there's two ways to make sure that you can never get into a hard financial position. And those two ways, if you are on point with them, you can never have a bad day financially. It's to be dead set on your cash flows and then have enough money that you enough money somewhere where you can go put your hands on it when you have to defend your honor. And so when you don't have the cash flows, if you still have the money you can go put your hands on, you're still good. It's when you don't have the cash flows and you don't have the capital that you're hosed. And I'm look, this is some sincere stuff. There were times back early on where I had several $1,000,000 of net worth, but I legitimately could not pay for a gallon of gas. I mean, my money was so flipping tied up because I was so into real estate and I was pushing the envelope very, very hard. So correspondingly, that's why I totally agree with you. It's not just like I just go haywire and take every piece of capital that I have and jam it against everything. It's uh it's actually the reverse of that. It's like, well, I show people every time when they give me a specific example, I'm like, well, you could either put that extra 50,000 in a house. It's usually first time home buyers, by the way. You can put the extra $50,000 in the house, and that means your mortgage is going to be what, $100 less or whatever it's going to be. Or you can keep that $50,000 on your side of the ball and just protect it. And then if you are between jobs, you can literally pay that mortgage for like 10 years or whatever. Like so
Yeah.
it's this, we don't want to come up with a false narrative of like why leverage is risky. Like I can tell you right now, uh, I will for sure have tons of liabilities on my dying day. Hopefully that won't be for a number of years, but to the tune of it could be several $1,000,000. And I'm okay with that because the assets and what I was able to create are far, far greater than the $3 million or whatever I'm going to have in liabilities. So it's a great point. I think you just have to kind of step back from a second, not be all emotional about it. I'm not saying you are, Matt. I know you were just asking a question that everybody has in their head, and just
Mhm.
like look at it and be like, well, is it better to bury that in the property or to keep the money on my side of the ball? And like I can tell you, the more times you can stay in control of the money, all the financial institutions want to be in control of your money. The more
Right.
you are in control of your money, the better you're going to be on all financial circumstances moving forward. And it's not a, like here's the thing about a mortgage that doesn't change. Your taxes will change, your homeowner's insurance might change, but like unless you have an arm or something, like your rate is your rate, and that's going to feel easier and easier every year. And if the rates ever get better, then you refi it and stretch out the amortization again, and then it's even easier. And
Mhm.
Matt, something I'll just riff off of what you also asked because this never occurred to me until I had several properties. But I tell all new people getting into real estate this because they won't see it until they see it because it feels like on your first property, like, oh my lord, what did I just agree to? Can I lose my house? I just used my HELOC to help buy this thing. But then when you have four properties, like in your mind, you're thinking, oh, well, when I have four properties, like that's going to be four times like crazier. No, because when I had one vacancy with one property, that's 100% vacant. When I have
Yeah.
one vacancy on 4 properties, I'm 25% vacant, and I can use the other properties to kind of help me out a little bit. So it's really interesting how we think about some of these things, and then we again take a step back, and you just go, "Oh, that's weird." When I have more properties, that seems like it would be more risky or more challenging. It actually gets easier. Same thing with some of the concepts I'm teaching here. When you put money into some of these areas where the money's still growing, you don't even have money in spots where it's still growing when you have it at the bank. So you
Right.
don't even know what that even feels like. But if you have it in an account where you have growth pushing in behind you, um, I mean, like it's kind of crazy. Just because we haven't experienced with the banks, we don't even know how it feels. But then when we get to that spot and we start to experience dividends or compounding or actual growth, it's actually like you kind of feel like a donkey. Like you're like, why did I not do that before now? Because it makes all you have to do on any of this stuff is just compare it to the right thing. Okay. So
Right.
if I compare some of these accounts to bank money, it slays bank money. And then the question just becomes around risk. Yeah, absolutely. It's like which ones make the most sense to you? Because there's, like I said, there's lots of different accounts types that you can use. Um, yeah, but that's it always comes down to controlling the risk as much as possible.
Uh, so we have a bunch of folks on live with us mentioned in the chat. We'd love if you guys have any questions, go ahead and post them there in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on that. Maybe I'll keep the conversation going
Sure.
with Jeff in the meantime. Jeff, when you kind of referenced it a few times, your early story about like getting the ball roll, like I have found, or I've seen others as well, like there's an inflection point in all of our kind of personal finance lives where not only does the ball click, but the money start things, cash flow, and things kind of the waterfall effect happens like a little bit faster, right? So like I think the famous quote is like the first 100,000's tough or the first million's tough, but
Million, yeah.
you know the 10 million after that is easier, right? So like for you, tell us like what your story was like pushing that ball up, and then what was the moment where it felt like, oh, this is easier now, or I've reached a meaningful situation where I have a little more like flywheel effect occurring.
Yeah. Well, before I answer that, it something you said just kind of it prompted me just to bring up something, just because this is like one of those experiential things where, because that's kind of what you're asking about, is like, hey, of your experiences, like what are some things that are, you know, you're have affected how you look at some of this stuff. I read in a book, by the way, when I started into real estate investing, there was no, I said there was no podcast, no YouTube, there was no deeper or bigger pockets, deeper pockets. There was no bigger pockets. There wasn't
Yeah.
this sort of deal. So you had to actually go into a bookstore, and literally every time I was in a new town, I would just browse the bookstore to find out which books I hadn't read on real estate investing. They all said the same thing, which was I should have started earlier. And then there was another piece that I read that I thought was really interesting. It's actually what's changed me from doing small cottages. The cottages we were buying at first were $60,000, and this is like 2004. And then I read it was Dolph DeRuse is who said it, but it said uh, he was trying to be extreme at the time, and he said, "Why would I buy 10 $1 million apartment complexes? Why wouldn't I just buy one $10 million apartment complex? Because the due diligence is the same on each property that you buy. But if you can buy a $10 million property and you do one due diligence, and then you might only have one boiler and you might only have one roof, whereas on the 10 $1 million, you have 10 boilers, you have 10 roofs, you have 10 due diligence. And he just said, I'd rather buy the more expensive properties. And so that's actually what got us into the short-term rentals, because I was buying $60,000 properties, and then all of a sudden I just was like, oh well, I wonder if we could buy in resort areas. And so we bought at the Outer Banks, which is a beautiful coastal part of North Carolina, and then we bought like mountain homes up in a resort in Virginia. I say all that to say that was a good move. However, there's also some wisdom in, well, the old don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I do think with short-term rentals, if you have a bunch of short-term rentals but they're not all on the same street, you haven't put all your eggs in one basket. But there's plenty of stories since my time that I could tell you about where a town just decided we're not going to have short-term rentals anymore, and it's crushed real estate investors. And for me, I had 4 properties up on this mountain resort. Mind you, my backdoor neighbor was a hotel, but the county sued us for doing short-term rentals because it was like a new thing, and they were like
Right.
they actually made up the term short-term rentals because up until that point we just were like we're doing vacation rentals and whatever. And we actually fought the county and won, which is weird. But we had some pretty baller attorneys. But then all the homeowners up in the resort, even though we had to drive up Resort Drive. So tell me why you wouldn't think you could rent on Resort Drive, but you drive up Resort Drive, and the homeowners up off of Resort Drive all sued us uh, civilly, not so civilly, but civilly, and so we never went to court, but we had to prepare to go to court. And then every time right before we go to court, they would basically pull the case. So what they were trying to do is bleed us out, and it was pretty successful for me because all the investors up there, according to how many properties you had, that's how many shares you had to put it, like how many shares you had to pay the attorneys. And I actually had to pay the attorneys more than I was making, and it came very true that you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. So I just say that as a cautionary tale because there's been plenty of examples since then where someone gets really hot on a particular market, and they just start going and going and going, and then all of a sudden the market cools down or whatever. So that's a really important point for me. That was so hard, like it literally almost bankrupt us. In fact, I probably should have taken bankruptcy, except for I was trying to come into this financial sector and I didn't want to have a bankruptcy on my record. So I just really slugged it out. And so along the way, I had to make some decisions where some properties that I thought were going to be short-term rentals, we put tenants in and long-term and stuff like that. And we just had to kind of slow the bleeding. But what I can say now is for me, like you're talking about passive income. I decided at a certain point that I didn't want to deal with some of the shenanigans that are there. So then we did some lending. And so by doing some lending, and this is something that unless you've really studied it, you don't realize that if you can do some like short-term notes, like for guys that are doing flips, well, you don't just make like 10% or 12%. Like you get to turn the money, so you start to understand the velocity of money, and so that same dollar might actually make 20 or 30% based on some of the deals that you can get. So it's all about just turning the same dollar several times in a year. And so, but from a flywheel standpoint, again, I've always been about creating what I'm trying to do around my lifestyle that I'm trying to create for my family. And so I realized in my business that if I put a little bit more emphasis on my business, I don't want any of my clients to think that I'm more interested in my real estate than I am about their money. So that was just a kind of a trade-off decision where I was able to create a lot of passive income, so to speak, in my business to go alongside of what I was trying to do in my real estate. And then I will just say that strategically, because the kids going to college and some other things that are kind of more complicated for today's discussion, but just doing some strategic sell-offs of the real estate, which, by the way, I still hate that happened because it's hard to sell a property and not look back and be like, why did I sell that property?
Right.
Unless it's
Right.
a real dog. It's a real dog, maybe. But most of the real estate that I've ever sold, I was like, well, that wouldn't be so bad to have it back. But I think just one other point there that I will make is there are times where no matter what your theory is or what you've decided, the more open-minded I've been about possibilities. I mean, even on my QR code there that I had, I said it's I think it says bring awareness to unleash the power of choice. Okay, it's because I want people to understand all the options available to them, and so many times we kind of look at it more binary, where it's like either this. Now, when you look at this or that, it's easy to make decisions. But when you understand the full set of options, sometimes you have things that you didn't even know were possible because you can become aware of. And so I remember, when you read or hear people talk about like, and we signed the contract on the hood of the car. This is legit, a signing of the contract on the hood of the car. My buddy called me and said, "Hey Jeff, that one property that I was going to buy, I'm just getting cold feet. I got to step out of it. So if you call Joe, he was going to do seller financing on it, and you could probably just walk into the same deal because he's going to be mad that I'm going to step out of it. But if you want to step into it, like that'd be cool." Well, it was seller financing, and anytime someone's seller financing, I'm in. Not necessarily going to buy, but I want to hear what's up. And his terms were
Yeah.
really, so I stepped in there and we signed it on the hood of his car at a, like a mini mart. And a little bit later that day, the word got out that I had indeed bought it, not Eric. And this guy called me and he offered me $40,000 more than what I just bought it for. And
Wow.
I was just like, no way, because I know this area is appreciating, and stick it. and I did not take the money and run. And so sometimes your philosophy and what you've like really doubled down on, this is how I'm going to go about it. I definitely, when I look back on that property, I wished I would have just, like, think about what the return is on that baby. If he would have just, basically, I just would have, uh, I would have like all of a sudden made myself into a quick wholesaler real quick, and
Yeah, exactly.
that would have been really really cool. But I just, my long term vision, I was like, I'm very dedicated to my long term vision, and but so that's why I just say, like, when you're doing your real estate, like sometimes you gotta just make the trade off decisions of like what makes sense right now. That property we just bought in Tennessee, you could argue very easily wasn't perfect timing for us, but the deal was so good in our eyes. And that particular deal, um, that we put together, like I didn't think I was going to find another deal like that. So we just took it and ran with it. So I think that's probably, as to your point, like how does some of this get easier? Some of this gets easier because you have enough stuff going on where you're like, well, yeah, I can handle the fact that the timing on this might not be perfect, or so I think that's probably why they say the second and third million are easier, is because once you have enough assets or options at your avail. The joke is, the golden rule is how we should live our life. My one mentor says, well, the golden rule is who holds the gold makes the rules. And I do believe that the more capital that you have access to, I amaze my clients all the time, because if they never worked off of that proposition, when you have the capital, you get the calls. Like when I didn't have the capital, no one called and told me about their syndication or their deal. And now I get the calls every day. And like sometimes I hate the deal that I'm hearing about, but sometimes
Yeah.
I can't act on the deal, but I make sure my clients know about it. And then other times it's just like, this is perfect. Let's go ahead and do this one. So, but it's really great when you get in the position of knowing that the deals exist, because a lot of this opportunity that's out there, it's rather invisible to the world until you're running in the circles. And like the people that are in this group and hanging out with people in this group, like that's where it all starts. I know you guys have probably talked about how your network becomes your net worth and all that kind of stuff. It's just so true, because you end up meeting more and more people that can help you in life, and then also vice versa, that you can hopefully help it in return. So it's that's kind of how that all works. But yeah, it's definitely a case of um, when you're feeling like in survival mode, it's kind of hard to dream forward a little bit. Once you start to have a little bit of thrive capacity, then all of a sudden, you know, nothing sounds outrageous. Like you're just like, oh, I maybe I can't do it this year or 3 years from now, but like that's a good next target to get to. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of fun for most of us, is to kind of dream forward what we can accomplish.
Yeah. I know we have 5 minutes left. I did see a question come in from Yulia, pronounced that right, in the chat. And she's going back to kind of trying to talk a bit more about leverage. So the question is, the more you leverage, the less your monthly cash flow would be. How it all works with high leverage and high interest rate.
Yeah.
Uh, it works great as a profit on the sale, but month to month, unclear kind of how you cash flow, I guess is the question is, right? If you're employing higher leverage, then you have to pay back, whether it's that seller finance or bank loan or whatever it is, right? And I guess, and so I guess that's the question a bit more there is how you
Yeah, I mean,
keep that in balance.
yeah, I think that's like what's always in our heads is like, well, if I leverage more, then I have to pay someone else more um, each month. So then my cash flows on that deal are going to be less. And like I'm always kind of amazed that people don't look at the big picture a little bit more. This isn't a criticism of the question. I'm just saying people in general, you could look straight across the board, look at politics, look at anything. They read the headlines and then they just have a feeling and then like that's what we go with. Just to dig a little bit deeper. I'm a scientist by training, so a lot of this stuff I've thought through pretty deeply. Um, but if I have someone tell me that because they put an extra 5% down, that all of a sudden the deal doesn't work, it wasn't a deal. Like you
Yeah.
understand, like
Yeah.
I'm not I'm not blind to the fact that if I borrow an extra 5%, I have to pay a little bit more. But that extra 5%, it's a little bit more, like amortized across 30 years. It's not a lot more. And so it might not be a good deal in the first place. So that's actually a metric you can use. And really the question has to be applied to each individual situation. And of course, it does change according to rates. But what doesn't change is that if you put the capital into the property, the extra capital you put in so that you can just tell yourself that the property is cash flowing better, that's just something that you artificially created to feel good about that deal. You should feel terrible about the extra money that you put into the property that you didn't need to, because that's sitting at 0%. And if you don't also factor in the opportunity cost, you didn't do all the math. You can tell me what the monthly cash flow is doing. I only kind of care about that. My clients always laugh at me because when people talk about interest rates, I'm like, I don't care what they are. Because interest rates, they're not like a rate per second. It's like a rate that's on the annum, and then things can change. Like so, I just read something the other day. I never really. This is probably an old timey thing. I just never came across it before. But they said, marry the property, date the rate, and I was like, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so and
Yeah.
so and so I was like, that's that's so true right now. And also, it. I found that property in Tennessee on the MLS. I found it on the MLS, and I did a
It's
subject to
out on the open.
and they wanted 10% down. And I said, how about five? And they said, absolutely not, until they wanted to sell the property, because I told them, I said, like, literally no one's going to come up and give you the solution I'm giving you right now. So let's go. And so for 5% down to be able to do a subject to and a wrap, like, so the deals are out there. And again, so like I'm saying, like, well, yeah, you could just kind of randomly stand back and say, well, with interest rates as high as they are today, Jeff, then you're not really that right. Like, I'm I'm not trying to be right. I'm just trying to be accurate. So if we're not taking opportunity costs into effect, if you're not calculating opportunity cost when you bury cash into a property, you're just not doing the full math. It's okay if that makes you feel good, but that doesn't make your money feel good. And it
Yeah.
makes me sad. And as Mr. Wonderful says on Shark Tank, and I say this to my clients all the time when they're telling me this sort of stuff, is like, it's okay, we can do it that way. We just have to have a moment of silence, as these dollars are, just literally clinging for dear life. So it's just a matter of each deal though. Like I'm telling you, so here's the one piece here which kind of can clear this up. The premise of that question is because I'm going to need to come with 8% money because of what the banks are doing to me right now. But I just talked about asset-backed lending, and I can tell you right now, my asset-backed lending money, it's coming in at 5.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying, like, you have to look at the individual deal. You have to look at the actual conference. Like, I agree. if I was stuck and I have to do 8% money and I was going to ignore opportunity cost, I could make a case for why you would maybe want to put more cash into the property. But when like I might only want to borrow 50% of the money from the bank. The other 50% can come from asset-backed lending. And then when the rates start turning with the banks, I can go refi that puppy out and get the money back to the asset, so I can kind of be in a good position and control the money. So it's a great question. I will also just say that circumstantially, when we look at the individual deals, um, I mean, right now my clients are coming with 20% down, but it ain't with cash. It's coming out of the asset-backed lending because it's 5% money. And the only thing I'm just careful with them on is just make sure your liquidity is staying good. Like don't overly put money into a property. Make sure we have a nice safety net off on the side, and not a safety net that we just pretend is there, because a line of credit can feel like a safety net until the banks get tighter and tighter sphincters, and maybe a year from now they decide that that line of credit is not going to be renewed. So
Right.
I would just tell you, my biggest, I think I've made three pretty good, solid, hard, bad financial decisions. One of them was being over reliant on lines of credit at a certain point in my life, because that's why I know that the banks started to tighten up in 2007, because I had three banks come to me and say, hey, that line of credit you have, it was either gone or much significantly lower. And that freaked me out, because I was like, walking around town thinking like I didn't have a care in the world because I had X amount of dollars available to me at all times. And all of a sudden it was like not that number. And that's,
So the
again,
line of credit was open for $150,000 in the bank. One day wrote you a letter and said, just let you know that we're not going to lend to that capacity. It's now $50,000.
well, yeah. And the other one was, I won't say what bank it was, but the initials are WF. Um, they let me put $40,000 back against my home equity line of credit. And then the next day they sent me a letter and said, hey, it's not 127 anymore, it's 87. And I was like, that's thievery. Put it back to where it was. Now, at the time, a forceful begging of me to have them remove it or move it back to 127, they agreed to. But like that was a bad day for me. but yeah, a lot of the lines of credit, they can, whether you're doing a business line of credit where they're doing yearly renewals, I mean, that's always concerned me, because I'm like, well, I mean, what if my credit gets a little bit dinged up a little bit and they just decide not to renew it? So that's, lines of credit are not liquidity. They're good
Right.
safety nets for as long as they exist. But like I know better now, because I've lived it, and it's not fun. And I always tell people, so this is kind of like parting shot here, is if you've never had liquidity concerns, I will just tell you that it's evil. And I use that word intentionally. And you don't want to know why I use that word, but like you start to have different kinds of thoughts in your head than you've ever had before. And then I would tell people, but if you have had liquidity concerns, then we don't need to talk about it. Just come on in for a hug. We'll cry it out, and then we'll kind of go from there. But that's, out of all the things that I could ever share with somebody, it is be on point with that liquidity piece. It is not to be trifled with. And if you have good cash flows, and don't make up a story. Lines of credit are kind of a story of what you can go put your hands on. Money, people say stocks are liquid. Well, yeah, but when times are tough, the
Yeah,
stock
they're
market
dropping.
drop. So then they don't feel that liquid, because I'm not going to have $100,000 worth of stock drop down to 60 and then be like, I think I'm going to go maraud it. Like, that doesn't make sense. So it's like really having, I believe, non-correlated assets that you can count on is really, really critical. So yeah, but anyway, hey, I had fun tonight talking to you guys. Matt, it was really cool. I think those were good questions and good things to think through. And that's really just the thing. Like, all the things that we believe, I tell people, like, there's this circle of knowledge. We can't know everything, but the two most important things we should always challenge are the things that we don't know and we hear about. We just have to decide, do we need to learn more about it or not? But then the things that we know to be true, when someone challenges those things that we know to be true, maybe it's time to reconsider how that actually works. Because I do believe that the two things that we miss in life are the things that we never are aware of. that's outside of our line of vision from a knowledge standpoint. But then also the things that we are just convinced are true that just aren't that true. I mean, that just being off by this much can really have a big difference. So, I think if anyone here felt challenged or wants to talk through some of that stuff, like that's why I love what I do, is because we're not trying to mess with people, but we are trying to have them like really figure this stuff out and think it through and make sure that their money's constantly working for them. We don't want dead dollars anywhere.
Yeah. Jeff, thank you. Thank you again. Thanks for those of you that joined us live and for those of you that watched us after the fact. Jeff shared his QR with contact information. You guys can refer to that in the recording. Jeff, thanks again. Happy holidays coming up to you and everyone joining, and we'll hope to see you guys next month.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, and happy holidays, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.